Hi guys, and welcome back. Today we have an update on the Eventuri RS3. If you've been following the channel, you know that car is currently up to stage 2 and we had a really good run out at VMAX in it. It's time to look at the suspension on this car, and we've got an MSS Sport Kit to go on the car. Now usually when you put lowering springs on the car, they are an aesthetic mod and they don't that good for handling. The reason why we're going for the MSS kit is because we've been running the development ones on our M3 and M5 and I've been actually really impressed with the way they ride and handle. And the reason for that is that they're slightly different to a normal lowering spring. So I'll just unbox these and show you what we have in the box. Aston, you could have sharpened the knife before you gave it to me.
Blunt knife, not safe.
Okay. So what makes the MSS suspension different to traditional suspension is that on the rear it has 2 springs stacked together with a coupler in the middle, and that allows one spring to take care of low speed bumps and then the other spring to take care of high speed bumps. So the whole idea is that it just provides more comfort and more stability than a traditional spring. So just get everything out. Oh, lots of bits in here. Just the adjuster tool. Okay, I think that's everything. Okay, it's well packaged. So that is the adjuster, and that allows you to change the ride height on the rear and the front. The advantage with the MSS kit is, which is different to other height adjustable springs, it fits actually into the stock spring location, so it doesn't require sleeving. And also you can run the suspension at stock ride height, which you can't do with a lot of the others. They give you a minimum lowering. So for people who actually want to improve the ride but don't want to lower the car, this is also an option. But if you want to lower the car for aesthetics, you can without ruining the ride quality. This bit's going to take a while, so I guess Matt can speed it up. Matt? So that's the kit unboxed. As you can see, it's a little bit different to a normal spring kit, and we will go into more detail about that when we have the stock springs off the car. I'm going to go take the car out on its stock suspension, and we're going to try something a little bit different today. It's really easy for me to drive the car and say how compliant it is and how well it rides, but I want to try and prove that with some data or facts, like we do when we dyno the car and we V-box it to show you the acceleration times. So I've got an app that's actually designed for measuring severity of earthquakes. So it's going to measure essentially the up and down measurement of the car as it's going down a particular road. So I'm going to measure that stock and then measure that with the MSS kit on and see if we can see an improvement in figures rather than just feel. We're about to test the stock suspension. Matt has now got a handy GoPro remote so we can turn all 3 of the cameras on. So we have one camera on the front arch, one on the rear arch, and also the one facing me. We're going to use a app for the phone that's actually designed for measuring how bad an earthquake is. It measures in meters per second squared. So it measures all kind of acceleration, like forward, back, up and down. So it should give us some data we can use. We've not done this before, so it's going to be interesting to see how well it comes out. The whole point of doing this was that it's easy for me to say, oh, it's smoother, and you can see on the video how much the wheel's going up and down in the suspension, but it'd be cool to try and actually capture some data. So I'm just going to stick this in the middle of console and also use a screen recorder to capture the data. And the idea is to capture the data stock and then capture the data after the MSS suspension has been fitted. and show you guys what the difference is. So I'm going to go to the test road, which is quite bumpy and quite long. The reason I've chosen that is to give us some good data over, I think it's about 1.5 miles, and the app measures the maximum acceleration and gives us an average over the road. So if I'm just taking into account the road surface, I'm gonna essentially keep the car at the same speed and then capture the data that way. So I'm just gonna pull over here and set it all up. So I'll reset that, start the camera. 2, 1. Okay. Set the cruise control. So I've set the cruise control to 55 miles an hour. This is a 60-mile-an-hour country lane, and it's probably one of the worst ones around here. So it'll be a good test for stock versus MSS suspension. Recording there.
Ryan Little.
With the suspension out of the car, we can take a closer look. So we have the front suspension here and the rear suspension here. On the front one, we have the MSS adjuster, which controls the ride height. They also provide you with this tool to make those adjustments. And as I said, you can run this at stock ride height if you just want the improvements in handling. On the rear is where it gets more interesting. So this is traditional rear spring. It's just one spring that has to handle all of the work the suspension does, apart from damper, obviously. And on the MSS, you have two different springs that are stacked on top of each other. So the way MSS describe it, and I think the way it's easier to understand is think of it like a speaker that has a tweeter, mid-range and subwoofer, and each of those speakers handles a different frequency. So on this, the two springs handle different frequencies to give you a superior ride quality and handling. So MSS called this the ride controller, and this is a sports version of the suspension. You can also have track, so it will be a different spring rate. In the middle they have the MSS coupler, which allows the two springs to work together seamlessly. The top spring is called the ride enhancer, so that will deal with the lower speed bumps, and this will do with the higher speed bumps. And the MSS adjuster again. So height is controlled from here, as again you can run this stock ride height or you can lower it. I think lowering on this particular kit is up to 30mm front and up to 40mm rear. So we're going to fit this suspension now and go back out on the road and do the same test we did on the stock suspension.
Your time.
With the MSS suspension fitted, we're going to do the same road that we did before on the stock suspension. I've set up my app to record the ups and downs in the road. So I'm just going to set the screen recorder up and then I'll reset it at the same point that I did when we tested the stock suspension. So let's see how it gets on. So the idea is I get onto the same stretch of road, I stick the cruise control on around 55 miles an hour. It is a 60 mile an hour road and it's quite bumpy, and we can then compare the data. Bear in mind that this suspension has just been put on, so it's brand new. It hasn't had time to settle or anything. So we can run this test again after around 500 miles and then 2,000 miles and see if there's any difference. So this was the point that I started. So let me hit the reset button. There we go. Skipped.
Your time.
stopped earlier. With the comfort test out of the way, let's take the car on one of our usual country lane routes and see how the general handling and feel is. There's not too much traffic around, so I can get a bit of a clear run. Out of the box, the RS3 is pretty good. I am a BMW guy, so I do miss the oversteer nature of BMWs. I do find this to understeer slightly when you're pushing on, but it's four-wheel drive and it's set up to be like that. Just had to pause the camera there for a little while because there was just way too much traffic around. So if you follow the channel, you've probably seen us drive on this road before. It's a very nice B road we have near our facility, and it's a very typical English road, sweeping bends, undulations. I know the road pretty well as well, so it'll give me a good idea of what the car's like. So first thing I can notice with the MSS is when you're going over those bumps that are quite smooth and the car wants to lift off, it's dealing with those quite well. It doesn't feel like it's losing any contact with the road. On some cars I can actually get a bit of air there, and when it lands back down and it compresses, it's just much more stable. So just going through a village. So in terms of the comfort, I'm quite impressed so far. You know, you lower a car normally and it does affect that, especially when you're just putting springs on stock dampers. That's always more of an aesthetic mod, regardless of what people say. Oh well, yeah, when it loads up for the corner, it's much better. Feels like it's got a lot more control. So although the RS3 wasn't bad, it's a hell of a lot better with this suspension kit from MSS. Never get bored of that sound of that intake either. The other thing I've noticed is that on these undulating surfaces, the braking is much more stable as well. Where the car would have a tendency to kind of pitch left and right from the back, it's actually braking in a straight line. Longer sweeping bends are very different. Car's just completely flat. Didn't think it would make this much difference, but it's really night and day. I know that's a very cliched term, but it is. Even more impressive at higher speeds, where the car would feel crashy and get a bit upset. It feels like it's much better. That's good. I mean, that's only a preliminary run on the road I'm quite familiar with, but it's very different for the better. I'm impressed so far. As I mentioned earlier in the video, we were going to try and show you some empirical data about the difference this MSS suspension would make to the car, and especially in terms of the comfort over an undulating road. So on the same road, the stock suspension on the app I was using, which measures meters per second squared, it was 1.8 meters per second squared. With the MSS suspension fitted, it showed an average of 1.6. So that reflects what I was actually feeling in the car. The car was much more stable and smoother, and the app was showing the same thing. So over the same distance, the same road, the car had less vertical movement, which means that it was smoother, and that's exactly what I felt. So I think that's a good way of showing the changes in the suspension. What do you guys think? Do you think there's a better way we can show you this? The reason I wanted to do this was, like, normally when we test speed or time or power, I can easily show you a dyno graph, data logs, and for example V-box or draggy times. But with suspension it's quite difficult to do, and we talk about how the car feels rather than what's going on with it. In terms of the high speed cornering and general cornering, the suspension was absolutely amazing. It was almost as if the faster I was going, the more difference there was between the stock and the MSS suspension, and I'm really impressed with it. What we're going to do is let the suspension settle and do an update video maybe after around 2,000 miles. I know that when I got my F90 M5 and it was new, I was complaining that it was really stiff, but after about 2,000 or 3,000 miles, everything settled down and it did actually become more comfortable. The next video on the RS3 will be the stage 2 update and more data on the dyno and draggy times on that, so keep an eye on that. And then after that we will be going to VMAX on May the 11th, where we'll be fitting the hybrid turbo hopefully before then, and we will be able to see the difference that those modifications make to the top speed. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you'd like to watch more of this project, you can do so over here. If you'd like to watch what YouTube suggests you might like from our other videos, you can watch that over here. If you like this video, please click on the thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. If you guys have any questions, please drop them in the comment section and we'll do our best to answer them for you.